so here we are at the end of phase 1, saying, all right, we want to focus on a mature breakthrough innovation capability. And so we had to define that. So we call it the degree to which the organization has embedded a system for initiating, supporting, and sustaining radical innovation or breakthrough innovation activities. But the literature has shown that when these groups get put in place, a senior leader will turn over and a new guy comes in and he says, we need breakthrough innovation. And so I'm going to start this group. And so we get started with the group, and the group has no idea what they're doing because nobody's had much experience with this before. And you either hire a guy from inside who's made his career on the basis of incremental innovation or operational excellence, so he doesn't know, or you hire somebody from outside who doesn't know any of the networks or any of the politics inside the company. And then it takes a while for them to get up to speed, to hire their team, to develop their portfolio of opportunities and move them along. And within a few years, leadership says, who are these guys? They have all these projects that have nothing to do with any of what we're doing, and nobody's making any money on this stuff, and so they shut it down. And on average, these groups last about 4 years, was what the empirical research in the 70s and 80s was showing. In fact, it's pretty much still the case today. If you create a new ventures division and it's kind of off to the side, it's about 4 years, and that's all. So the link to the organization's strategic intent is crucial. Where do you link and where do you stay apart is a very important aspect of the decision. But we were looking at this and said, all right, so we have to figure this out. That's our next study. And so recognizing that much of these projects occur sporadically, and these champions are breaking all these rules, and if their senior sponsor or their patron leaves, they're finished, right? And usually the champion just goes away. And also, we're really wasting any learning that occurs from one successful champion. There's no mechanism by which we get better and better at this as a company, right? So we know also that there have been a lot of attempts at doing it. And so in many different ways, many different organizational forms. So these are all US companies, US examples, but you may be familiar. So 3M is supposedly one of the most innovative companies because everybody can have 15% of their time to be free to work on their passion, right? And because they have these models that if what you're working on becomes interesting, you can apply for money and you can form a project. If you are making good progress, you apply for more money and you can become a little department. At any rate, a guy who's inventing something can end up being a general manager of a whole new business unit. And in fact, I was mentioning yesterday, when they interview their people to come into their research and development, they ask them if someday they would be interested in running a business. So they want R&D scientists who have an entrepreneurial edge, because that's their mode for growth. But when we looked at 3M, we can say how many breakthroughs have come from 3M. And what we see is they make many new businesses, but not necessarily on the basis of breakthroughs. It's a lot of new stuff, but not something that you would recognize 3M for beyond Scotch tape, right, in the beginning, right? Okay, then you have the new ventures groups that have been tried, which I already mentioned. Sometimes for a single project, you have to have a skunk works, put them off in far away. You have companies like the Palo Alto Research Center, Xerox PARC, that have actually created incubators that have come up with great inventions, great innovations, none of which benefited Xerox, right? All of which started other companies. So that's not going to work, right? As a company, we're not interested in that. We have other telecommunications companies at the time trying to create phantom stock that they all share with the inventing team to incentivize them, all right? Every company that we know of that has tried to do that, stopped doing that. because it creates what you call an us versus them mentality in the company. It's very divisive in the company, okay? And then you have like Johnson & Johnson Development Corporation, Intel Capital, several companies who've started their own VC funds. And they're investing in small startups with the idea that if this looks interesting, we'll own it already. We'll just buy more of it. Or it helps us stay on the leading edge of technological innovation. None of these has, I mean, this is fine as a supplement, but it does not help improve these companies, right, necessarily. Okay. So Clayton Christensen, who wrote The Innovator's Dilemma, and about the same time we were doing this work, was saying, forget about it. You know, you can't do it. Big companies can't do it. You have to leave this to startups, or you start a very diverse subsidiary that does not impact the mothership company, the mainstream company. And big companies did not like his solution. They're not prepared to say, we can't do this, right? And so, and we also were not believing that in his solution. So, our second phase of research, everybody okay with me here? We're still going on for like an hour already. I'm only through phase 1. Okay. I have a drink of water. Cheers. All right. So then that said to well, we were believing, again, so studying projects was very insightful for us, and we had learned all about these different challenges and had come up with this hypothesis of how it might work, this idea of a radical innovation hub. So now we had to develop our thinking a little bit, and you go back to theory, organization theory, and you look at organizational management systems. And any organization is comprised of these elements. They have to be in order to be an organization. For profit, not for profit, business, church, anything. So it has to have a particular mandate. You know, what's the purpose? What is the leadership situation and the culture that the leader is driving? How is it structured? Like in the case of a radical innovation management system, who does it report to in the company? And what other elements of the company does it interface with? And then how do we make decisions about the portfolio? Who's involved in making decisions? Is it one person? Is it a board? How is that board comprised? And what are the criteria we use for making decisions about what's in and out of the portfolio or the pacing of the funding? Okay? And if stage gate doesn't work, what does? What are the appropriate processes for managing under high uncertainty on many dimensions? And are there tools that we can use? And then what kind of skills do we need on our teams, on our staff, and how do we develop those inside the company? What are the critical experiences that you need to have a project manager in this space have already had? Okay. And then how do we measure? All right. How do we measure the projects? How do we measure the people? How do we measure if our system is healthy, our portfolio is healthy? What should the rewards look like? And then also, I was mentioning yesterday, there's one element missing here, which is the resources, the system level resources. Where do they come from? How much do they need to be? And, you know, how do we manage those resources? Okay. And I'll just say, because we probably don't address the system resources very well in this slide deck, but it was less important to have a lot of resources than it was to have a stable level of resources. Okay? What we would find is that the companies where they could predict that they were going to get the same funding each year could plan their portfolios and pace their portfolios in a much healthier way than those who got a lot of resources and then a little, they always got, you know, resources, but it kept expanding and contracting. Okay? Okay. All right, so now the ones in red, it's just a repeat of the earlier slide showing you which ones were involved in phase 2. And now, as far as how we collected the data about companies who had a declared strategic intent to build a capability for breakthrough innovation. Our first level of person contact in the company was the person responsible for the breakthrough innovation mandate in the company. That person in charge of creating a management system and overseeing that this management system was working well, was happening. And then we needed to interview the people that reported to that person and the people to whom that person reported. Okay, so we get a view from the people working in the system, and the people that wanted the system to take place, but mostly the person who was trying to build that system. Okay, and of all of our companies, one company had a system for about 6 or 7 years, and the rest of them were 2 years and younger. They were mostly just early on in starting to build these systems. Okay, so again, we called them up. We had a qualifying interview so that we understood all the elements of the management system. How are you organized? How many people do you have right now working in your system? How many projects? Why was it started? What is your mandate? And how is it different from incremental innovation in your company? Okay, and so we learned all the elements of the management system at that time. And then our research team had 6 people. We took 4 people to each of those 12 companies. So all 4 of us are listening to the same interview at the same time, writing notes and comparing our view of what happened, at the end of that day. Okay, and then we called the initial person, followed up every 6 months. Okay, and usually this person would say, "Oh, I hired a new person," or "so and so changed." So we would follow up with the new person as well to make sure that we understood everybody's perspectives. And this was a wonderful study because since we had to also talk to the people that they reported to, we got to talk to some very, very senior people in the organization, which is nice. But if all you talk to is senior people, you have no idea if you're getting the truth. I don't know senior people in here, but everything's working fine. So it was great to also talk to these people, right? The people doing the projects, right? So very interesting. Okay, so yeah, then we had 200 and some interviews, and all of these were transcribed, taped, and typed, and so you had this terrible job of reading these things, and we took all kinds of notes. We did all kinds of ways of analyzing and deploying this data. But one form of analysis that I'm going to show you that gave us big insights was that we noticed how often they changed who was in their organization and what the organization was designed to do. Frequent change there. And so we came up with some types of organizations that at the end gave us the main insights for this study. And we also developed timelines for each of these cases of what happened at the senior management level and what happened at the middle management level as we were building these management systems for innovation. Okay, so in terms of the key insights here, the first is in terms of looking at organization structures. I'm going to flip through these fairly quickly, so because this is maybe a little less important than the insight. But many of our cases started this way, that their main mandate was to get breakthrough ideas. All right, our company hasn't had a good idea in a million years. We just do incremental innovation. So my job is to send out a request for proposals for great ideas. Or we're going to have an idea jam, they would call it, or a conference where we have everybody come together and we generate ideas for the next breakthroughs for our company. Okay, so that doesn't work very well, turns out, because first of all, if you send out a request for proposal, you get flooded with ideas. Many of them are completely irrelevant to your company. Some of them are just ridiculous. Somebody, working in the, I don't know, in the mailroom has an idea. So in Nortel Networks, she was getting ideas for roofing material. It's just really kind of strange, irrelevant ideas. But over time, so a few things happen. You get thousands of ideas, and then you have to respond to each one of them. Because if you don't, now your employees are angry, and they're alienated, and they won't send any more ideas. And so it takes a lot of time and effort to say thank you, but maybe next time, and then you're still angry. So that's kind of a problem. But what we would find is in a couple of companies, there'd be a group that everybody knew this was the place to go if you did have an idea. And over time, it would settle down. You wouldn't have thousands of them coming in at any point in time. And this little team would review ideas, and they'd start to see patterns. This idea is very small, but if I connected it to the one that we saw 4 months ago and another one, it's all starting to come forth that we could do, regenerative braking, for example, in General Motors. Okay, and so that was how some of these things were born. But in most cases, what was happening in this organization was their job was to collect ideas, decide which ones they were going to do, and then send the ideas to the business unit. Okay, what happened in the business unit? Absolutely nothing. Nobody was there to pick up these ideas. They had their own ideas, right? And so sometimes they would go into a new business development group within R&D and work on it a little bit and then send it to the business unit, and still nothing happened. Okay, so we began to see that they'd add people, and they'd keep the ideas for a longer period of time. So this we called not just idea management, but also a little bit of incubation. So now they're reviewing and elaborating and building business concepts from these ideas, doing a little research, reaching out into the market, maybe acquiring some new technologies, beginning to investigate, and they would work with R&D. Some of these guys would now get an R&D, subset of R&D dedicated to this group, and they would begin to cultivate and test these out a little bit to see if there's anything viable here in this technology, or if the technology had started the idea, if it was viable in the marketplace. And so they began to add some staff here and co-opt some other staff in the company to work on these ideas a little bit. Then they'd send them to the business unit, and what would happen? Nothing. Okay, the idea would die. So one of the companies, several of the companies would told us over time, we now keep these ideas. We have dedicated project teams. They each have an advisory board. We coach these guys a little bit. We try to connect this. We have a governance council now who now reports here, so that there's a conversation all the way up the chain about the impact, the potential impact of these projects on our company's future. Okay? But some of these guys, if we think that it will align with the business unit's strategy, we will send it then to the business unit, because the business unit is represented on this team. Okay? But if it doesn't align with any of our current business units, we have to keep it, and we have to grow it as a business so we can prove that in our company it's a viable business. Now, this requires a lot of resources, and so these guys had to work very closely with this senior governance team to build these businesses and get the right kind, the amount of resources. You're building plants, or you're bringing in new capital equipment at this point in time. Very strategic choice of the company to invest or not to invest. Okay. Now so that was kind of a model that was sequential in its nature. Then one of our companies, an amazing company in terms of its strategic, well, it's execution, it's ability to execute. They said, okay, we're going to have these Horizon 3 projects. That was the way they called it. McKinsey has Horizon 1, Horizon 2, Horizon 3 projects. So that's their lexicon that this company adopted. So Horizon 3 are the far future projects, right? And corporate is going to sponsor those that are across divisions. You know, they could have impact across many of our divisions. And so the corporate group, it was run out of the corporate strategy group. This was IBM. They had this program called EBOs, Emerging Business Opportunities. You can Google it and find all about it. It was quite successful for them. And so they brought general managers in to run these corporate level EBOs. And it was considered like a promotion for a general manager to have an opportunity to grow a new business for IBM. And they got a lot of coaching from the Senior Vice President of Strategy, the Senior Vice President of Technology, and Senior Vice President of Finance. They would spend several hours each month with each of these teams. It's amazing. Now, in each of the divisions, each division was told, you guys do this also. You create EBOs for yourselves, because each division of IBM is about the same size as many multinational companies, right? They're very large divisions. So they were responsible for their own aligned EBOs. And so we called this a self-similar model, like a snowflake, you know, it repeats itself over and over. So here, what they're doing at the corporate level, they were also repeating at each division. And then here, this was how GE structured. They had advanced technology programs that the chief technology officer, together with the CEO, Jeff Immelt, put in place, elected. And it was run out of corporate R&D, and each one had its own team, mostly scientific researchers, and maybe one business development person. Mostly the science guys, though. But each of these was aligned with one of the business units. That was how they originally expected it to happen. And so as new incubations were happening here and new relationships with, say, hospitals and all these, the business unit would be aware, and the business unit would begin to sell products that were not yet even developed. They were looking for acquisitions to help move them into the market. And so they were trying to grow a business before we had technology invented yet. Okay, which is moving them along very, very quickly. It is very, very strategic in their approach. Okay, so after we looked at all these different organization structures and how they kept migrating, so the ones that were idea generators first became ultimately these holistic sequential models. We realized then it's not just one competency for breakthrough innovation. It's these three very, very distinctive things. You see this over and over and over again in the way, if it wasn't working for the company and they changed by adding some of these other competencies. And so we identified discovery, incubation, and acceleration, and I define them in these ways. So it's creating and recognizing and elaborating and articulating opportunities. So it's a competency of conceptualization. So yeah, it draws on our basic research and R&D labs, hunting for ideas, and hunting outside and licensing ideas. Any of it, wherever you get it, it's fine. You know, it's not just R&D, it's discovery of new opportunities for our company. Incubation is where we are trying to evolve it to a proposition of how a business could play out. It's like a business hypothesis. And so this is a competency of experimenting. We're experimenting not only with technical development, in the labs, experimenting in the market to learn about markets that don't exist. We are experimenting on how to create value chains and value systems. And we are experimenting internally to understand if the company can stomach it strategically. Because many times they'll lead you down the path, the leaders, and then they'll say, no, it's not of interest to us, right? So you don't want that to happen at the end. You need to create this, embed it in your experimentation. And then as you have evolved a business proposal, right, a hypothesis about how it could play out, you've got interested customers, you're beginning to get some first revenues, you've generated a list of applications, you have some good progress on manufacturing processes, so you know you can get good yields eventually. Now you have to escalate this business. Okay, so we got to ramp it up to the point where you know it can eventually be profitable. So you build a prototype. It might be a kludgy prototype, an ugly prototype, a big, you know. Industrial designers would shrivel at this. But they tried to learn about specific technical issues associated with the resonance of the image and these kinds of things. So the big market here was in full body imaging, and yet GE starts with the breast scanner for mammograms for women because they could manufacture it easily. And they start to use it and they start to learn a lot about technology and the user interface. And they're not charging any money for any of these, but over many years, 71 down to 1985 was their first commercial launch, right, of the full body prototype before they started to make any money. Each of these was a successive approximation of learning that moved into the next prototype, okay? So these, many times companies do not want to be seen in the market with something that's not perfect. But when we look over and over again at the patterns of how these play out, it's exactly what has to happen. So you are partnering with the market. Here's one with GD Searle when they were developing NutraSuite. All right, and they decided that they were going to do many parallel probes of how we use this aspartame stuff in different applications. On table sugar, packet sugar, whipped cream, right? Cereal for your breakfast, right? Drinks, carbonated sodas, chewing gum, ice cream. Okay, so they start here. Here's a story with cereal. When you put aspartame on cereal, you know what happens? It blows up. It's all soggy. It comes out over the top of the bowl. It was a terrible chemical reaction. And so they couldn't use it in cereal for a long time, but they learned things that they could put into these other applications. And ultimately, it becomes approved in 1981 after beginning in 1970. And they could begin some first few commercial sales and finally hit the ready-made spoon sugar in 1983, which they believed was their very large market. So these are all probe and learn. This incubation can take a very long time. Now, this is one of the most interesting tools for incubation that I've ever seen. Terry Fadum, the new business development guy who saved the Biomax thing many times, he told us about in one of our interviews. This is about Biomax, actually. It's a 2-page ad in Scientific American magazine. Okay, so you're talking to professionals, R&D professionals in other companies, because that's who reads this magazine. He also ran these kinds of ads in other chemical trade magazines. But if we were to read through all this, it basically sets up some ideas. It talks about this material. It doesn't give away any intellectual property secrets of how it works, but it says, here's what this material does. But it first starts out by saying, imagine a world where we don't have trash, or something like this. And it goes on and describes this material, including its manufacturing processes, and all these kinds of interesting things, and weaves in these imaginations about what it could do. And at the very end, down here, it says, a world with less trash, share the dream. All right. Throughout DuPont's history, many of our most important contributions have only come to market through collaboration with other companies. If the substance of this article leads you to conclude there's a development opportunity, between your company and DuPont, fax us at this, right? For your non-confidential idea. He ran this, he got 100 responses, all right? Which created all kinds of market experiments with it. And then we come to find out, I mean, he told us about this. I go after the interview to the library. I look in all Scientific American magazine. I get this, and then he's got them for all other technologies as well. And it's a way of exposing a technology to the market and letting the market teach you about what the uses could be. Very interesting opportunity. Okay, so there's a lot of mistakes people do in incubation, mostly with trying to close it down very soon and get arrive at one product, right? So it's always about kind of keeping this open. Also, we notice generally there's nobody responsible for it on a project team, okay? It's not labeled as anything, and people who are project managers aren't necessarily good at doing this kind of thing. They want to adhere to a budget and a schedule, right? And the early market participation that I just showed you in Probe and Learn is quite important, but many companies say they are reluctant to do that, right? They don't want to share their trade secrets. And if the opportunity looks like it'll fit into a business unit, it seems like it's going to be very easy, but the transition into the business unit is extremely difficult. Okay, so we have the management system for incubation, all right? And again, it plays out a little bit differently than the one in discovery. So now we're about, are we meeting some milestones? Is our portfolio churning at the level that we want it to? Very interesting kinds of system elements. And then finally, acceleration. So now what we're trying to do is build critical mass for those projects that are gaining traction, right? How do we make them predictable? That's what the thing is, because that's what a business unit needs, is predictability. There's so many of the teams that we've interviewed that want to talk about those guys in the business unit. They don't know what they're doing. They keep starving our projects. It's all, unfair. But you have to realize that the guys in the business unit have their job that they're doing, right? They're not doing your job. And so we just have to set up with clarity what everybody's responsibility is. So we're trying to now scale these. And so our objectives here are predictable sales forecasts, acceptable yields, and a path forward to profitability. We know we can get to profitability within the next X number of years or months or whatever. Okay. So, mostly companies seem more comfortable with acceleration. We know how to do it. It's just, whose job is it? It's not usually R&D's job, and it's not usually the business unit's job. So, clarifying that, it becomes important. And again, we give you the management system elements, how they would play out in acceleration. So now, that's DIA. And if you think about that now as the breakthrough innovation capability, right? We think of DIA itself as a system for breakthrough innovation. So if we want to define this now as a system for breakthrough innovation, it's the set of activities that manage the links and interfaces within DI&A, oversee its health in terms of meeting the breakthrough innovation mandate for the company. Like, are we making progress on our mandate? And its perceived role in the firm and its portfolio of businesses. So there's a lot of work to be done at the system level, which is all these kinds of things. Attend to the portfolio's health and diversity. Is it the right size? Are we moving projects along the right way? Are we turning over the projects fast enough? In comparison to like a venture capitalist portfolio, they talk about the churn rate in their portfolio, or in a finance portfolio. Have we got the right people on all of our project teams, right? There's a core team, and then we got to add certain specific talents to that team. Providing the project infrastructure that they need. Are we helping to remove barriers for our team members? All these enabling strategic alignment between the project and the company's leadership. A lot of these things. And then overseeing the transitions from discovery to incubation to acceleration to its ultimate landing zone or home in the business. So there's a lot of work there. And it's really fun to think about, what if your system isn't balanced very well? And this came about because companies started to tell us, these little sayings in red are quotes from different ones of our companies. So here you have a very normal situation, which is that we have heavy investment in R&D, and they believe they've come up with the greatest breakthroughs forever. But we have an underdeveloped incubation capability and an underdeveloped acceleration capability. And these guys tell us we can't get heard. We are developing great breakthroughs all the time that nobody uses. So this would have been the guy in Steve Sassoon in Kodak. I mean, he must have said this a million times, right? And then we have, I love this one, we have big ideas that are incrementally executed. This was told to us by a director in Johnson & Johnson Consumer Products. We have some great R&D here, and we can do things that could enable all new platforms of growth. We have no incubation capability to speak of, and we fast track it to a line of business, and basically they take the most obvious product that could fit into their current product line and commercialize that, and then all the rest of the opportunity space is left, you know, unfarmed, let's put it that way. Now here we have a company that says we don't have any courage. We have great R&D. We pretty well know how to incubate, but we never put any money in and actually create a business out of it. All right. So our team came away from that interview saying, I don't know if I believe that. If you really are good at incubation and you know that's an opportunity, you wouldn't invest. So we were asking ourselves, are they really good at incubation here, or is that just what they fiddle around with it, but they don't really reduce their risk enough? Then these are the guys that'll say we're going to bring in small businesses or license in technology, and we can incubate, and man, can we sell. Right? So this is open innovation. And then there's this very sad story where you have a person, this was a story at IBM that I was telling yesterday. They're not connected as a system. And so you have a guy in our first phase that developed the silicon germanium technology for a new kind of a chip for IBM. He gets a guy from business development, or it's a sales guy that loves new business creation. Together they work on finding first paths to market, first customers, all this stuff while it's in R&D. And then it gets transitioned to the business unit. And the head of the business unit says, the new business development guy that worked here, he can come on the team, but he's not going to lead it. I'm going to put one of my program managers on this to lead this project now. That program manager thought he knew everything about program management, and that this earlier guy knew nothing about it. So he took none of the relationships that they had developed. He started all over again. And then they expected the old program manager, business development guy to provide the first forecasts of sales when in the business unit. And that guy gave a very small number because he couldn't predict, and then they increased it and they didn't make their sales, and that guy got demoted. It was not good. And so at any rate, that's what happens when you don't think of this as a system. So you need a governance board overseeing this system, or you need what we call a chief innovation officer, right? Somebody's in charge of that whole thing. No matter where it's happening in the company, we view it as a system. So we come to this, which is our little cartoon model of how this could work. And you have this person that is not a magician or a witch. She is an orchestrator, and that's a baton for the orchestra. And her job, his job, whatever, is to make sure this is all working well as a system, but also to manage the relationship of the DIA, Breakthrough Innovation Management System, with the rest of the mothership company, the rest of the company, and to realize that there's stresses on the company, right? The blue lines are internal stresses that can happen. CEO changes his focus on innovation, somebody's suing our company, something bad is happening, poor earnings, or we just have a very poor culture of innovation here. And the red lines are external things that affect us. Global economic expansion, everybody wants innovation all of a sudden. A war, for example, various things. So the company's capacity for innovation will change, right? Here is a constrained capacity. Here is a munificent capacity. And this happens if you're in a company, all of a sudden the CEO says, I want breakthroughs. Well, we didn't have anything going, nothing in the pipeline. Tomorrow you're supposed to have a breakthrough. And then you finally get something going and, we can't afford any innovation right now. We have to leverage, exploit everything we have, current customers, current markets, right? So generally in the literature we've shown that we just expunge these groups, fire everybody, they all leave, get rid of the portfolio. But if during constrained capacity we still have these people in place and we still have DIA, but we slow the pace of the portfolio, or we decide on a subset of the projects that we're going to move forward. Just like a marketing budget, it expands, it contracts, but it never goes away. So should be the innovation budget. And that's what we're trying to say. We make innovation a function in a company. Just like we've made marketing, just like we have production, we need innovation and understanding of incubation and acceleration and discovery capabilities as a function in a company. Professionalize this. It's not just a process. It's got to be its own function. Okay, I'm going to skip through this unless we want to come back and we need to have some time for you guys to talk. That all talks just about if you're going to start this in your companies, what are some patterns that we've seen as companies get started down the road and the challenges that they face? And skip through all this other, you don't want to spend time on this, believe me. All right, but then I just want to spend a few minutes telling you about the projects that we just now completed after phase 2.